Good evening and welcome to this Monday night edition of The People Show right here on Intellectual Radio with Mark Wallace and Charles Thomas on this relatively warm, cool Monday evening. We're glad to be back here with you on IntellectualRadio.com. We are also streaming live at Facebook.com at The People's Show, as well as you can view us live on YouTube. You also can call in.
Right. We have a number, 708-28953. That's Intellectual Radio. Just join the conversation.
A great conversation it's going to be, and we're going to get right off into it. And, you know, the midterm elections are still going.
Isn't that amazing?
Going.
A month later.
And Georgia is one of those states that it seems like they have an election every 18 months.
In Georgia, you have to have a majority of the vote in order to be elected to certainly statewide office.
Right.
51%. And neither candidate, Raphael Warnock, the incumbent Democratic senator from Georgia, I think he got 49.5% of the vote. Herschel Walker, the former football player at the University of Georgia, the All-American, they say the greatest football player to ever graduate from the University of Georgia, finished at 48.5%, I believe. So neither got the 51% required on November 8th. So they're having a runoff on December 6th. That's tomorrow. And it's going to be very interesting because of the stakes involved at the United States Senate.
Right. Absolutely. Right now, the Democrats still control the Senate with 50 seats. And it's an even split, but they control because of the 50 split, and the
vice president can vote
that
in a
tiebreaker. But this one seat, people would ask, why is it so important? And the reason why it's so important is because for the Democrats to gain that seat, it would neutralize one of their more resistant
Joe Manchin
or Kirsten Sinema.
Yeah, she seems to have fallen off to. I think she learned something in the general election when Arizona became a blue state, and I think she realizes now that she doesn't want to go against the grain anymore, because she could face the wrath of a majority Democrat voters in Arizona now. Interesting place. I was just there last week.
Very interesting. I'll be going there in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, it's amazing because so many people have moved to Arizona from California, people who could basically sell $1 million house, which isn't much in the Los Angeles or San Francisco Bay Areas.
Right.
$1 million doesn't buy you much there at all.
Right.
But it can buy you a mansion in the Phoenix suburbs.
It could buy you a ton of landscaping.
Absolutely. And you'd have money left over to buy
Yes.
yourself a nice EV.
Yes.
So a lot of Californians have moved to Arizona, and they've taken a lot of their Democratic politics, their blue state politics, with them, and they basically turned Arizona blue.
Well, a lot of Chicagoans have moved and retired to
Absolutely.
Arizona.
Absolutely.
A lot of Chicagoans have moved there. So it is an interesting dynamic. The same thing in terms of the dynamics changing in Georgia. Georgia is certainly turned from a red state to a purple state, and it's becoming more bluish because more than 30% of Georgia now population is the black population that mostly vote Democratic.
If you look at that election map, I know I would see it on several of the networks on election night. You have that area around Atlanta that is solidly blue, and that's not only the city of Atlanta, but I think it's Forsyth County and there's other counties I can't remember just outside Atlanta that are solidly blue now.
Right.
But the rest of the state is red. Maybe you might have an exception in a place like Savannah, but most of it is red.
Right. Most
but
of it is red, but
the
more than
population
30, the
center
population is changing more 30%.
definitely. And I think
is
the
increased.
governor of Georgia, who's a Republican, who was reelected over Stacey Abrams,
Brian Kemp.
he has been very aggressive about supporting Herschel Walker in the general election, trying to translate some of the votes that were for him,
who he did not support in the midterm, if you want
but
to
he
call
didn't
it.
support Warnock either. I mean,
No.
I think he didn't, he
No,
wasn't
he did not
active.
support Warnock, but he certainly didn't. He didn't support Herschel Walker.
He didn't support Herschel Walker, but he's come out very strong for Herschel Walker now. But I tell you, I watched him and Herschel Walker at an event, and I was reading the body language, and Kemp did not appear to be all there.
I don't think.
Herschel Walker.
Kemp is not all there for Herschel Walker. Kemp is there because he has to, because of his party, right?
Right.
He has to do this little dance because of his party. But in his heart, he's not there. And when you listen to the way that Kemp speaks, he's one of those, what I would call real Republicans that want to deal with issues. They have a different philosophy of governing, but they're just not on that side of where they're just going to completely toe the line because there's somebody there with an R behind their name.
Well,
who
it's
doesn't
be
represent real values there. So
it's
look, even the lieutenant governor called Herschel Walker the worst candidate.
No, I don't know the lieutenant governor in Georgia.
Duncan was his name. He's
Republican.
outgoing. He's not voting for anybody. He's not voting for Warnock, and he said that he will not vote for Herschel Walker. He just said he's the worst candidate. That the Republican Party will probably go down as the worst candidate. The Republican.
This will be a turnout election. It'll be a turnout election.
Well, it's a great turnout. They're shattering all kinds of early
in the early
records.
vote. In the early vote, there certainly has been a large turnout in the early vote, but I think that's true generally speaking, because there is an early vote.
Well, there's been some changes in Georgia's law in terms of the mail-in vote as well. So people have had to go to in-person voting, and it's been harder because they have cut down their voting districts. So people have had to stand in line a lot longer, but they are doing it.
But they're doing it. Yeah. And I think the turnout, I know in the general election, was incredible, as well as the primary before this. And remember, this was a point of contention between the parties nationally. The Georgia election laws, when they changed them, they were supposed to be vote suppressive. Is that the word? They were supposed to be an example of voter suppression. But what we have found out is that more people than ever before are voting in Georgia, even though they passed these new voting restrictions in Georgia, which basically, I think that was they were crying wolf. I mean,
well, what they were attempting didn't work. What they were attempting to do.
Well, the law was the law.
But they were trying to make it harder, and they did make it harder to vote.
But people
also
are voting.
You had people who were spending millions of dollars making sure that people can get to vote, and people having to stand in line for 5, 6, 7 hours to vote.
But did they?
Is not.
Did they do that?
They did, because the stakes. There are a number of dynamics that have gotten people motivated to go and vote.
Yeah, I didn't see that. I didn't see any long lines in Georgia,
or tremendous lines.
But I didn't see those, and they certainly weren't reported in the media that I saw. But the bottom line is, more people are voting in Georgia under this restrictive law that actually caused the baseball All-Star game to be moved from Atlanta because of all the complaints that were amplified by the media that basically turned out not to be true, because people did vote in Georgia. But getting back to the race itself, I think it's going to be, again, the city and suburbs of Atlanta versus the rest of the state of Georgia. And right now there was a draw.
Well, they're saying it's a draw, right? I don't pay a
Well,
whole lot of
it's a
attention
draw.
to
I'm saying it was a draw
polls.
because Stacey Abrams was unable to overcome that red state thing that goes on outside of Atlanta.
Well, yeah, Brian Kemp got 300,000 more votes
exactly than Herschel Walker.
Than Herschel Walker.
Right.
Walker did.
And we got to see how that plays out in this next statewide, in the runoff, which is going to be the next statewide election in Georgia. It's going to be, we'll see.
Well, it's going to be interesting that and that they are willing to, to vote for a person as flawed as this guy is. I mean, it just, that's a whole nother conversation. But
you think he's flawed?
So I think that for every black man in America, for the racist tint of white men to use somebody like a Herschel Walker is really an insult to the rest of Black America, really to America, period. To put somebody like this guy up, who really can't even comprehend a children's book.
Really?
To be a United States senator.
So you don't think much of Herschel Walker as a candidate, huh?
I don't think of much of Herschel Walker as a person, so I'll leave it there. I just don't think much of him.
What did he do? What did he do? I mean, that would.
Well, I mean, his
as a candidate, I understand his politics,
his track record and his history of the things that he has done as a person. I mean, to hold a gun to a person's head because that person, didn't want to be with you.
Wait a minute. When did he did that?
Yeah, he held a gun to his former wife's head.
Oh, I thought that was Warnock who had the problem with his former wife.
No, that was.
But didn't Warnock have a problem with it? I saw a woman on television who identified herself as his former wife, as his ex-wife, who was talking about how Warnock tried to run her over with a car or something. Remember, did you see that video?
I heard that there was some sort of complication, but
I
don't think it was necessarily. I don't know that it was corroborated. I know that this was something that Herschel Walker himself acknowledged.
Really? I didn't see that. I tell you, I got to watch the same coverages. I guess maybe we're watching different coverages, but
no,
I
read a bunch of
say you
things,
saw it. I mean, you read it.
His own in his own words.
Really, man,
he acknowledged that. Look at his.
But all these guys have different character flaws. I mean, I know that Warnock comes under fire for being a pro-choice pastor, a pro-choice preacher, reverend, or whatever, and he gets a lot of flack about that from people who are.
I don't know why I'm
anti-abortion.
I'm a pro-choice, Christian, because I just believe that people should make their own choices for their own lives. That's not my position to determine what somebody else does for their lives.
I agree with you. I agree. I don't think anybody's faith really connects with the abortion issue. It should, because it's freedom of religion in this country. But at the same time, just as a point, I know a lot of evangelical Christians, particularly in the South, would take issue with a candidate who would profess to be a man of the cloth, if you will.
Except Herschel Walker.
Herschel Walker. I don't. I remember him being quite a football player. That really is.
I remember him being
Herschel Walker.
I remember him. I really don't remember him being quite a football player in the NFL. I remember him being more of a player at the University of Georgia.
He was
in the NFL.
But in the NFL, he was the kind of player who had been in the league 10 years and was still on special teams, would still play on special teams, covering the kickoffs and punts and such. Which I thought there was something about that I could appreciate. I mean, that his ego was not such that he could do that. His ego was under control. That's the message that I got from him there. That he was a different kind of Heisman Trophy winner who went on to the NFL because he played for quite a while. He played at Dallas, I believe.
Yeah, well, I see
And
why he didn't do a lot of talking.
Well, he's not the most. I guess is the word.
He's not the brightest bulb in the box.
You know, I don't know. I don't think you can really say that based on how your articulation, if you will. I mean, I don't know. I mean, because I know some people here locally
that comes out of his mouth, the things that
he's conservative. He's conservative.
We don't even know what this guy is. We have no idea what this guy is because he doesn't speak coherently. He doesn't speak intelligently. He can't, conjugate a verb and a noun. So we don't know what he is. We just know that he is being used, handpicked, plucked out of Texas to come and run in Georgia. And you've got the likes of Ted, whatever his name from Texas, and Lindsey Graham, that seemingly has to lead him by the hand everywhere that he goes because, he just flies off the rail when he's by himself. But that aside,
I mean, it's going to be an interesting race. Yeah. I think it's rural Georgia against Atlanta. Bottom line, Atlanta, if it shows up, I think they can beat Herschel Walker. But if they don't, then Herschel Walker can prevail because he has a very solid base in Georgia among the what has been a red state and is a red state outside of the Atlanta metropolitan area. So I think it's very important that people get out to vote, particularly in Atlanta. They've got to come out and vote in large numbers in Atlanta, and they've really got to be. I think that. I mean, there's got to be a healthy turnout in Atlanta to overwhelm the rest of the state of Georgia, because if it does what it did for Kemp, then Walker's going to win.
Well, I think because of the quality of the candidate, I think that the Brian Kemp Republicans are saying, we would like to have a real Republican, but we are Americans first, and we will live to have that fight another day. And hopefully that we could have, some real philosophical debates with a Warnock, as opposed to having somebody like a Herschel Walker there. And then we can have that fight another 18 months, which they're going to have with the other senator who's going to have to run in another 18 months.
Yeah, I can't recall his name, Imhoff or something. I can't.
Right.
I'm not
John Ossoff.
Not living in Georgia. I don't really keep up with
the
nuances of Georgia politics.
Yeah, but I think that the Republicans there, the more, I would just say Brian Kemp type Republicans or Georgia Republicans.
Now answer this for me. Brian Kemp, was he a Trump candidate or what? He wasn't. See, and I think that's
Brian
part
Kemp, I don't think that Brian Kemp was a Republican.
Because Trump, he had a problem with Trump because remember, he was the Secretary of State in Georgia during Trump's 2020 run.
Right.
And Trump had issues with the count of the vote, remember, in Georgia?
Well, he certainly was.
And I think he took a lot of it out on Brian Kemp, and I don't think he supported Brian Kemp in the Republican primary in Georgia. Now, I'm flying by.
No, he did not.
He did not. Right, and I think that was the bad blood.
Kemp to try to find some, phantom votes that were not there. And Brian Kemp
said, "No, I can't do it.
No, we can't do it. We're not going to violate the law."
Yeah, he evaded the specter of Trump during the Republican primary in January in Georgia. Excuse me. And I think that had a lot. That could have had something to do with how he won
Yes.
the general election, because people did not. I mean, Trump lost the midterms for the Republicans. Trump did the same thing. Trump, the thing about Trump that I don't want to see Trump run in 2024. I want to see somebody who would enact Trump's better policies to run.
What are those?
The border, energy.
What
Energy?
what was his policy on energy?
His policy on energy was drill in the Western United States, drill the shale oil, the fracking. Trump was laissez-faire on energy. So once Biden came in and he stopped a lot of the oil leases, this country stopped investing.
But we're
in
producing
oil.
more. We're producing more oil.
No, we're not.
Yes, we are.
Not as much
Yes,
as we are. We're not the number one oil producer in the world
Well,
anymore. Not anymore, because it was environmental. The Biden administration did not want to drill for oil here. In fact, now they're going to Venezuela looking for oil. The president went to Saudi Arabia asking them to pump more oil, but oil exploration has fallen off because Joe Biden said unequivocally that he wanted to end fossil fuels in the United States, and his policy is fairly solid.
There are people around the world, even
okay, but here's the play. Here's the lick. Here's the lick.
Dependency on
the oil companies
because of our climate.
The oil companies will not invest in drilling or refineries in this country because they understand that the administration, as Joe Biden said, wants to end the use
I don't
of
think that's a
fossil
bad
fuels
thing. I don't
immediately.
think that's a great thing.
So they're not investing in it the way they were investing in it during Trump. Speaking of the oil companies and such, that's that is a course of action that is understandable. Okay, he wants to end the use of fossil fuels, so we're not producing as much.
So it does other.
Okay, but I got
Yeah.
immigration, the border. Something's got to be done down there, and it's not being done right now.
Well, that's on both sides.
Okay,
because
but
it
Trump
could
was
be
building a
in
wall.
15
He had a
building a wall.
policy to stay in Mexico before you come into this country so that we can process it orderly. That's not happening. So the border, energy, foreign affairs, my goodness, foreign affairs, there was no nuclear brinksmanship under Donald Trump. So if you can somehow restore order internationally, get the border under control, and get gasoline prices so that we're independent in terms of producing energy again. Those are three policies under which Donald Trump did. I would love to see those policies reenacted, be it a Democrat who does it or a Republican who does
You're
it.
never going to get the border. You're never going to get the border or immigration reform together because you can't seem to get both sides to want to do something about it, because you could do something about it in 15 minutes if they really wanted to do something about immigration reform.
Okay, but fine.
So
I just think, however they do it, I think that if someone could reenact those policies, not everything he did, because I didn't agree with everything he did, but at the same time, certain things he did actually worked. The world was a safer place when Donald Trump was president. And I'm not saying Donald Trump was the reason. I'm not saying that. But when he was president, the world was a safer place than it is now. And I think that if we can return to some kind of stability internationally, where we are not producing weapons that we're sending to Ukraine so that they can fire them at Russians, and Russians firing weapons at basically American weapons in Ukraine. That's not a good situation.
Well,
We don't need that situation in the world. We need to cool it out.
That's not created by the United States. That wasn't
What is
created by the United States.
What is it?
Russia's attack on Ukraine was not created by the United States. Is that what you're?
Well, I'm saying that I think if you read a little history and you go back to the 1980s and 90s, I was actually in Europe at the time covering the fall of what was in Czechoslovakia. There was an agreement on the part of the Russians and NATO that there would be a buffer between Russia and the other NATO countries, the Ukraine, I believe Finland, Belarus, and another one of those, Lithuania. There would be a buffer. Those countries were forbidden from joining NATO. That was the agreement. As NATO began to spread toward Ukraine and the Ukrainians beginning to express democratically that they would like to be part of NATO, the Russians reacted. And the Russians then moved into the Donbass, which is that eastern region of Ukraine, in order to ensure whatever the excuse, but we use excuses too. I mean, for diplomatic stuff, if you will. So that's why they made that move there to make sure there was always a buffer between the Russian Republic, the Russian Federation, and NATO, because they saw it coming that NATO was going to eventually move into Ukraine.
Well,
now, do the people of Ukraine have a right to join NATO?
Well, they certainly have
Absolutely.
a right to protect themselves.
I mean, in any democratic society, the people should be able to say, well, we want to be part of NATO or the European market.
And this attack from Russia certainly solidifies their reasoning for wanting to have an ally.
But bottom line is
protect themselves.
We have nuclear powers aiming weapons at each other, which is not a good thing. Not a good thing at all. We don't need to destroy the world, to my way of thinking, over Ukraine. I don't know anybody who's Ukrainian. I don't know anything about Ukraine. Ukraine, as far as I'm concerned, in the United States, what are we? Ukraine? Are we going to fight about the Ukraine?
They're human.
No.
Well, I don't think we're fighting about.
We're not fighting about.
No, we're not.
We got people in bunkers in the western United States on computer screens aiming weapons at Russians. You think that the Ukrainians are operating those missiles? Of course not. We're doing it remotely using GPS to spot Russians where they are, to kill them, shoot them.
We're not firing missiles at Russia.
I'm suggesting that these modern weapon systems that we developed in this country, Raytheon, General Dynamics, whatever, those weapons are being used in the field by the Russians. Why do you think the Russians are getting their butts kicked? Because they're using modern American weapons.
America is giving.
Yes, and Americans are operating the weapons.
Americans are not operating these weapons. Where did you get that from? Where did you get that from?
I get it because you can use your phone and call up the GPS in this country for Ukraine.
No, but you've
got people who are sitting in this.
You're suggesting that the United States is at war with Russia.
Absolutely. World War III is underway.
No,
man, look, do you really think that a weapon system that is developed in this country, that between February and now, the Ukrainians know how to operate? You can operate those weapons from any place in the world. All you need is a computer and a GPS system or an AWACS airplane flying over the area.
Charles,
you can fight these people remotely.
You're going to have to corroborate saying that the United States is involved in a war, because if the United States is involved in a war, that means that the Joint Chiefs of Staff and Congress would have had to authorize.
It's a proxy war. You're using the Ukrainians to drive around the missile systems to put them in the places where we tell them. International law? Are you kidding?
We have
international law. What was Vietnam international war law? What was the Iraq invasion international law? Come on, the international law means nothing. Man, these weapons
Well,
are so
it
sophisticated right
depends. It
now
depends
that
on it depends on who it is.
they are being used in a remote fashion.
Yeah,
The
but the United
Ukrainians are
States is not
driving the
involved in that.
missile
I
launchers
don't have
to
any.
places in Ukraine, and the Americans are basically
Yeah,
operating
but
them
you're
from
saying
this
that, Charles, and
distance.
I think that is
They
not.
have cameras on the drones. The drones see where they're going, and a guy sitting in a bunker in Nevada can see the same thing that the drone camera is capturing.
We're not operating weapons and charging Russia, flying bombs into Russia. We're not doing that.
We're
The
not
United
flying
States
them
of
into
America is
Russia.
not
We're
doing that.
flying them into Ukraine against Russian positions. So they're doing it in Belgium. So they're doing it in Great Britain.
We're
But they're
providing with
doing it.
Ukraine with weapons to defend themselves
And huge
Ukrainians,
weapons that you cannot
Absolutely.
imagine.
Absolutely.
Weapons that weren't even used in Iraq
Absolutely.
because they've been developed since then.
And Russia is getting a lesson that it should never have gone on this mission because of his grievance.
How's he going to lose? Tell me
of
that. How does he lose
grievance.
this? How does Putin lose this war?
I think he's already lost this war.
But how does he?
I think
But how does
lost
he?
this war because
Does he
is-
surrender?
No, look, every war, they're going to have to sit down and find a way to peace. There's going to be a negotiation.
So he's going to just surrender.
To peace. No, I don't think he's just going to surrender, but I think that there's going to be, I think he's going to be to the point to where he's going to have to say that, it's time for us to sit down and negotiate.
I hope you're right.
Happens.
I hope you're right, because the big danger in this
He's not gonna just wave a
nuclear
flag and
brinksmanship
say,
is that the loser is the one who will push the button in an act of desperation. I hope you're right.
No.
You don't think that anything like that could happen?
Well, of course it could happen.
Yeah, absolutely.
Charles,
and that's the problem.
it
That's the
could
problem,
happen.
Mark. It
A lot of
could
things
happen,
but
and we're in a
it's not
situation
likely that it's
where it
going to
could
happen.
happen right now,
Yeah, it's not
because
likely.
we're actually having a shooting war with, whether it's Ukraine by proxy, but the Russians have more nuclear weapons
Yeah, but do you
than
think that
any
Putin,
country on earth
is willing to put his life on the line?
I don't know.
No, he's not.
I mean, I
The man
have
is
no
afraid
idea.
of a
I don't
cold.
I don't know the guy. I don't know his personality.
Cold. He's afraid of a cold, so
Okay,
he's certainly not
fine.
going to
I
do
mean,
something
I
that is
hope
going
you're
to-
right. I really hope you're
yeah.
right that this doesn't escalate to anything worse. Now, you look at the situation in Taiwan. I found that
Let me say this to you.
very
Let me say
interesting.
this so that we can move. I promise you that he will not go
You
anywhere
promise.
near.
I got that
okay?
promise.
He
I
will
got
not
that
go
promise. So
near.
you probably
There will
picked that
be-
up
there
from
will
your
be-
last phone call with him.
There
But
will be-
I don't know the
there will
guy.
be-
I can't
don't-
promise anything about him because I don't
the
know
guy,
him.
But I
But-
certainly know that he is not going to put himself at that type of risk.
Okay.
That's
Very
not,
good.
That's not going to happen.
Just very briefly, this thing in Taiwan, where they had an election, what amounted to their midterm election
Mhm.
in Taiwan,
Mhm.
and China, of course, wants Taiwan to be part of the mainland.
Mhm.
Very interesting development there, because they had this election, and the ruling party in Taiwan, it's a democracy now.
Mhm.
The ruling party lost. In fact, the president of Taiwan, who doubles as the chief of the ruling party, had to resign as chief of the ruling party because the losses were so great in the provinces and cities around the country. There is a movement in Taiwan, a unification movement, where there are Taiwanese on that island who believe and want to be reunified with mainland China. I didn't realize that until I read the story about the election.
Yeah.
But it's a democracy. So they have elections like we have in this country.
Mhm.
And guess who wins generally? The one who puts on the best campaign, the one who has the most money. The Chinese, the mainland Chinese, are funding unification candidates in Taiwan. So while they may not actually invade Taiwan to take it back by force, they are creating a situation where they have a movement on the island to reunify to the point where they believe or could believe that they can take Taiwan using democracy.
Very interesting.
Very interesting.
Very
and
interesting.
And all this flying fighter jets over Taiwan, that's all posturing, perhaps, that their real goal is to do it from within using the democratic process. But if they do it, they're gonna control the semiconductors. The world's supply of semiconductors would be controlled by the Chinese, and those semiconductors are used for. I mean, they're all over this room that we're in right now. The computers, the microphones, everything have semiconductors, and the world's number one manufacturer of semiconductors is Taiwan. And if the Chinese get it, they will have access to proprietary information about semiconductors, whether they're in your car, in your home, in your phone.
Well, that's why I think it's important that the United States has an aggressive, I think that they're working towards that, having an aggressive campaign to bring back manufacturing, and certainly that is happening. I'd like to see it happen on a much more aggressive basis, so that we are producing again and being very competitive, that we are able to produce our own products in this country without having to be so dependent upon, China for products. I mean, probably about 80% of what you buy out of Walmart and Home Depot and these places come from Japan and China. So I think that it is important, and it's certainly incumbent upon this country to become much more aggressive, that we can build our own semiconductors and our own manufacturing here, which will create millions and millions of jobs. I mean, it would be the New Deal for this country to do that. I think that we could certainly reduce this acute, impoverished growth that has happened in this country just by having an aggressive campaign, Democrats, Republicans, independents together, to have that kind of aggression to build manufacturing, so that we are building our own products and not being so dependent on somebody else.
Yeah,
I mean,
Congress,
83% of goods that are coming from Amazon, from Walmart and these places, 83% of those goods come from China and Japan.
The Congress did authorize $50 billion to develop a semiconductor industry, or to redevelop it in the United States. They did that last year. So they understand.
I think it should be twice that.
Well, they understand that it's a real problem.
That's a real
problem.
And it is a real problem.
But the Chinese are not going to kill their customers. As far as war is concerned, they are going to kill their best customer. Dope Man told me that many years ago. I was in the projects here in Chicago, and they would let white ladies ride up to buy their drugs, and the gangbangers would actually watch the kids who were in the child seat in the back while the woman went upstairs to get the drugs. Nobody messes with the customer. And I think the Chinese are basically the same way. They're not going to mess with the customer.
Yeah.
Hey, look, we're going to have to take a break. Okay. Again, our number is 708-223-8953. You are listening to The People Show on Intellectual Radio. We'll be right back.
Edition of the People Show with Mark Wallace and Charles Thomas right here on Intellectual Radio and YouTube. We are live on youtube.com, The People Show, as well as Facebook Live at The People Show. Every Monday night, right here from 7 o'clock until 9, chopping it up, talking about those issues that matter. And speaking of issues that matter, we have another election that is going to fire up on Wednesday.
The only election they call it, right?
Right. The only election. Of course, as we speak today at 5 o'clock, ended the ability for those who wanted to challenge. Of course, they had to turn in all their petitions on the 28th of November, and they had until 5 o'clock today. Any of those who wanted to challenge mayoral candidates or aldermanic candidates, they needed to do it, which I have a real problem with because, listen, I think competition is good. You want to get into, and it's a democratic process. And if we're talking about a democracy, everybody should be afforded to participate in that democracy.
But already we've got 10, 11 candidates. 11?
11.
And I mean, it's becoming overwhelming. Some of these people, to be honest with you, don't have the proverbial snowball's chance in spring.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that they're not. Some of these candidates just aren't real. They don't have any money, and we all know that money is key to running for public office in the United States, particularly in the third largest city. They don't have it. I guess it's an ego rush for a lot of people. And then we have so many black candidates. How many black candidates do we have now?
Well, so why? So what? That has never bothered me that we have.
Well, that bothers me because it means that it splits the black vote.
Well, you have white candidates. You have multiple white candidates.
What multiple white candidates do you have here? You got one white candidate. I think it's Paul Vallis.
No, you don't. No, you have
the other white candidate.
You have the guy who was the head of the police federation is a candidate.
Who? You mean the union, the police union?
Yeah.
No, he's not a candidate.
Yeah, he
Canizera?
Mm-hmm.
He's not a candidate.
Yeah, sure he is.
No, I don't think he is. I think Paul Vallis is the only.
No, he's not.
White candidate.
Because you asked that last time.
I'm sorry, man, if I got that wrong, but
yeah,
I was under the impression that Paul Vallis is the only white candidate and that Chuy Garcia is the only Latino candidate.
And that may be so.
And the rest of them are African American, black people.
I just do not have a problem with having multiple candidates. We had multiple candidates in the last mayoral election, and we ended up with, I guess, somebody who says that they're black as a mayor. And I just don't have a problem with that. If we're saying that we are a democracy, and people are able to get into the election. By the way, how many other cities allow or require for people to have meet the kind of requirements that Chicago has in order to participate in an election?
Was it 7,400?
Yeah, you have to have 7,400
valid signatures
to
get on the ballot.
To get on the ballot for mayor. You have to have 473 valid signatures to get on the ballot for alderman. And I'm told that for mayor, the going rate is $6 to $10 a signature. Right. $6 to $10 a signature.
Well, that's if you go out and you buy them. I mean, yeah, it's like that. Yeah, it gets to that point.
So $150,000 on average for a mayoral candidate right out the door just to get enough signatures to get on the ballot.
If you get them that way, because
Right.
you can buy them, and there are people out there who are professional petition handlers.
Well,
I'm looking at these numbers again, man. There's Willie Wilson, Sophia King, Rod Sawyer, Frederick Collins, Cam Buckner, Lori Lightfoot, 1, 2, 3, 4,
Brandon
5,
Johnson.
6. Brandon Johnson, that's 7.
And Jamal Green.
Jamal Green, that's 8. I got Willie Wilson. We got 8. I think there's 10 candidates. Now there's Paul Vallis, and there's
This one, this
Chuy Garcia.
This other candidate, there was another white candidate that I did not know. I don't even know who he is.
I don't know who he is either.
But I'm gonna pull him up and
With
see.
petitions.
Well, we don't know.
I mean, as far as I'm concerned,
we
Paul
won't know.
Vallis.
We won't know. We won't know until I don't know when that deadline is.
You mean for knocking you off the ballot?
Right.
Yeah, but I mean, I think that you're going to get probably at least 3 of these people
There's going to be a bunch
the
of
ballot.
there's going to be a bunch of dropouts too.
Well, Brandon Johnson, Lori Lightfoot. That's a lot, man.
Yeah, there's a lot. There's a lot. But
I
look,
got 10 candidates.
but and guess what?
And that one
None
that
of them.
mysterious
None
person.
of them to this date, none of them have a substantive message or plan that is going to address the systemic problems that we have in Chicago. Because the Chicago economy impacts the state of Illinois. Right? Impacts the state of Illinois. So you need to have, you need to have an effective plan. And we need to get back to some good old American policies and innovation to attack these problems that we have. Right? Everybody's talking about crime. Paul Vallis today was talking about crime, and he sounded like, the same old warmed up
Like
soup. That the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of the leadership, and I'm going to hire new leadership, and I'm going to promote from within so that the rank and file will, trust the leadership, and that nonsense. And we're going to have a beat police officer in a patrol car in every beat. And I'm like, okay. And you're going to do something about Illinois has just been ranked as one of the states with the highest rate of poverty and the highest rate of unemployment. So what are you going to do about these conditions that produce the kinds of areas of violence and crime that we see happening all over the city that makes people, apathetic about going out of their homes or going out to a movie or going to dinner or to spend money that helps to continue to move our economy? What are you going to do to address those issues? What are you going to do to address the 1 in 4 people in Chicago that are living below the poverty rate? What are you going to do about that?
And the vast majority of those people are Black people.
Right. I have not heard one from Willie Wilson, Lori Lightfoot, to
Chuy Garcia,
Johnson, to Chuy.
None of them.
Not
You're right.
one.
Not one of them.
Have talked about a substantive platform.
Not one of them.
So here's what I have decided to do is that I am going to, once we know that we have an official ballot of candidates, I am going to be inviting all of them to a briefing. This is not going to be a forum, but it is going to be a briefing where I am going to provide them with a substantive platform that they can run on that is working in other states that are much poorer than Illinois
Like
and
what?
poorer
Like,
than Chicago,
I mean, like Mississippi.
Mississippi,
I
South
know
Carolina.
I know what you're talking
Hold on.
about. I
Not
know what
only
you're talking
Mississippi,
about.
but it's in North Carolina,
Same thing
South
as in
Carolina.
Mississippi. Same kind of
They
program.
are all starting to do it. They're all doing
Which
it
states now?
down there. South Carolina, North Carolina, Mississippi, and even in Arkansas.
They're all right to work states, Mark.
Listen,
They're all right to work states. You're talking
That-
about you can't
that doesn't
do
that
economic
doesn't matter.
development.
That
It
does not
matters
matter. It
hugely.
does not. No, what matters is that you have people who are willing to get together and to develop a plan and a plan of action to make it happen. I don't want to hear about what can't be done. I hate the word what can't be done. Can't is an excuse to not do anything.
And
okay?
if you can pull, if that can be pulled off, fine. Here's the big problem. I think you can find people in government who will love what you say. They'll say, we need to do what Mark Wallace suggests. But then the unions will they sign on? Maybe they will. But I tell you who won't. The companies.
No, that's not
the
true.
companies. Well, no, it is. It
No,
is
it's not
true.
true.
The companies are not going to go to a state where they believe that they're going to be unionized out of business. They believe that. They are not going to come. It's the same way that companies are leaving Chicago now because they don't like the conditions under which we're living here or that we are governing here. They leave.
That's solvable.
They
that
leave.
is
Well, but
solvable.
Tell that
is
to the
solvable.
folks at Boeing.
Listen.
Tell that to the folks at Tyson Foods. Tell that to the folks at Caterpillar. Tell that to those folks to get them to bring their companies here. I don't think that they're going to do it. Where have they done that? Where have they done that to states that are not right to work states?
Even
the other thing is Amendment 1 is not going to help this process at all. Amendment 1 just passed in the recent election that enshrined collective bargaining into the Constitution.
So what's wrong with that?
Because these companies
What's
look
wrong with
at
the
this
person having a right to
because
be able
they'll
to
go to Texas.
make sure that they have
they'll say,
a right
"Hey, Houston, Dallas, Austin, those are places that compete."
Yeah. Okay.
I don't think in South Carolina there are cities that compete. In Mississippi, there are cities they're going to say, "Well, hey, we can get the same thing in Mississippi, and we don't have to worry about a union."
Charles, I am not that person who looks and see that there's a problem that cannot be solved. I just fundamentally don't believe it because if they were able to solve the big problems that they have in the poorest region of the country, if they were able to solve that and they went and got somebody who went and got a company who had never done any business in the United States of America. No, they were supposed to be going somewhere else. They were going to Pennsylvania. No, he convinced them to come there. Not because they were a right to work. It was not because
I don't know. I haven't talked to them. I don't know, but I'm saying that.
Well, let me remind you. Let me remind you of this. We had a conversation. You and I had a conversation. Maybe you don't remember the conversation.
I remember the conversation very well.
With Joe Max Higgins. And several,
who, by the way, developed the Golden Triangle in Mississippi.
Right.
Just so our audience knows what we're talking about.
And we'll give them some more info because I think it's important that people understand that. But he was able to break through to Democrats and Republicans, black and whites, who he said had no clue as to how to win, had nothing to do with right to work. This was before they even became a right to work, whatever that tagline is. He said that what he had to do is he had to get them into the mind of understanding how to win and how to win big. The same thing has to happen here and can happen here. But you have to have people who are willing to do it, who are willing to try it. I mean, Franklin Delano Roosevelt said, listen, for God's sake, you do something, you try something, but you don't just sit on the side. If it fails, say, hey, it failed, but get up and try to fix it and do something. But you can't just sit around and say, well, we can't do. You can't do this and you can't do that. Can't is an excuse not to do. That's what can't is. You can do anything that you determine yourself to do and that you have a will to do. The state of Illinois has a lot of money. Hold on. The state of Illinois has a lot of money. The city of Chicago has a lot of money. They have a lot of land, and people want to come here. They want to come to this region. We can put together a plan that works for everybody to participate. They've had them here once before, and it was a union town then, and it's still a union town now. We had manufacturers all over the place with unions.
Yeah.
And they were,
but they're
thriving.
capitalized. Okay. They're capitalized that way. Right. And I'm saying that the companies will not come here because companies are not coming here, Mark. They're leaving here. That's a fact.
Well, we have to change. We have to change.
Absolutely. You have to change the dynamic.
I haven't seen, and there has to be a better negotiation
that we've done in this. This state governmentally.
You're right.
In order to change things. In fact, we saw Amendment 1 pass, which enshrined collective bargaining, that everybody has a right to it. And those companies that want to move here with a tire plant or with another manufacturing plant, they're going to look at that and they're going to say, well, they don't have that in Indiana. Why don't we put the plant in Gary? Why don't we put the plant in Hammond? I don't know. That's the way they think. That's how they think. And that's what they'll do.
Well,
and we have to have more foresight.
Of course. But there has to be negotiations. There has to be negotiations between unions. There have to be negotiations between the companies. The companies, we want them to thrive.
But we need to have these mayoral candidates talking about those kinds of issues.
Yes.
And I think that is a brilliant idea, Mark Wallace, to pin them down and make them talk about real stuff. Right. As opposed to
the nonsense that they have been.
The nonsense. Now, the crime situation, to me, is not nonsense.
It's not nonsense.
They're going to have to deal with.
Their approach to it is nonsensical.
Well, our approach to it is going to have to be two-pronged. And one prong is the one you like to talk about, which is to get people some job, these people who don't have jobs and economic wherewithal, to get them that piece in order. We have to do that.
You have to have an engine.
You have to have an economic
engine.
But I'm going to tell you something else. You also are going to have what amounts to a war on the street. You're going to have to tell these people who are robbing and carjacking and doing this and shooting each other, they are going to have to understand at some point that you can't do that in the city of Chicago. It cannot happen. We won't allow that to happen. And that's going to mean something. I hate to use the word stop and frisk, but there's going to have to be some kind of, listen, let me finish. You're nodding your head on me now. There's going to have to be some kind of preemptive action to stop these crimes before they happen. And the people who are committing the crimes are going to have to be removed from our civil society so that the rest of us can go about working at our jobs, raising our families, feeding our families. This has got to stop. People cannot ride around 3 deep, 4 deep in a car and just see a woman alone on the street and rob her, which is what's going on. It happens every night in the city of Chicago. It's got to stop. And the police have got to stop it. And it's not going to be pretty. It's not going to be pretty. And some candidate, one of these people, maybe more than one, are going to have to talk about how they're going to do that and not violate the constitutional rights of every other citizen who isn't about crime. They're going to have to explain that, but it's got to be stopped. It can't go on.
Well, let me tell you this. we can talk about, this sort of preemptive thing, but if you don't preempt the exclusionary type practices that produce what you're talking about, you are not going to, you're going to have a constant problem of this. One of the things that they can do today is to get every police vehicle that I see sitting in parking lots, nice and shiny with shiny tires that are just clogging up the parking lots, out visible in the communities, visible, moving around. And police cars should not be sitting, burning up my gas, just sitting in the back of a parking lot playing Apple Candy Crash or whatever it is that they play on their cell phones. Okay, so no, every time that I pass by a police vehicle and I see a police vehicle sitting, they're on the phone with their partner. They're not even talking to each other, or they're not even looking at the computer or listening to calls that are coming. I don't want to see that. I want to see them burning up my gas, driving around the neighborhoods, because that will be a deterrent. The visibility of police vehicles in our community is not what some would like to say, well, that they're invading our communities. No, they're not. They're monitoring the communities as they're supposed to be doing, and the visibility of a police car will prevent some people who are on this carjacking and robbing and some of these other things that are going on. But we have got to, you can't have that conversation devoid of having the conversation about the conditions that produce this.
Okay, let me give you another condition, man. Something that Black people have got to begin thinking about. And that is the fact that our young people, and I say this as an elder, our young people are not marrying each other. They're having lots of babies, or they're having babies, but they aren't marrying each other. And consequently, I think it's 80% now of Black children are being raised in single parent households. 1 of 4 Black women is being married in her life. These are situations that I think are creating a class of young people that are involved not so much in school, but in a lot of the activities that we read about on the crime blotter, particularly young men. And we all know about the homicide situation and the violent crime situation, and how young Black men are involved way over their heads. 12% of the population, half the murders in the country, that kind of thing is happening to Black males. At what point are we going to begin to get some new information to our young people about family, nuclear family, family values? At what point are we going to do that? Because that has to be another front. We talked about solving the root problems, poverty. We talked about police work on the street to preempt some of the crimes. But we also have to talk about this family situation here in Chicago, because these are Black families that are being destroyed or have been destroyed. And I don't hear anybody talking about it. I don't hear, let alone a politician, I don't hear the clergy talking about it enough. It's almost like it's, you don't have to, you can't talk about that. You can't talk about that. But that's a real problem in our community, which is the single parent household, and the children or the offspring really not supervised. When are we going to deal with that? Is that something that these candidates need to deal with?
Well,
in terms of
listen, there are sociologists and there are studies after study after study that talks about the very things and the things that produce those situations. These situations are not disconnected from socioeconomic deprivation. They are not disconnected from that.
But wasn't
hold on. Let me just there are more. First of all, there are fewer babies being born in the first place, right? Fewer babies being born across the country in Black communities than there were 10 years ago, 20 years ago. So we have fewer of that happening. We have a growing poverty rate in Black communities across the country. And we can't just have these conversations in silos or disconnected. They are not disconnected from these socioeconomic conditions. Most Black people get up and most Black people are providing and taking care of their children. Most, Black men, percentage-wise, care of their children and paying their child supports than white men, statistically. So, but we do have these issues, these socioeconomic conditions that has to be addressed, because there are studies that show where people are doing better economically, their family dynamics are better. When people are doing poorer economically, their family dynamics are strained. So these circumstances are not disconnected. But what we don't have and what we have not had, and here you have how many Black people running for public office? How many? 8. Okay. 8 Black people running for public office, and not one of them have a substantive plan to deal with those conditions, to attack those conditions. They come up with these nonsensical placebos that I call, like the mayor's Southwest Invest nonsense, that you're going to put up these beautiful little art facilities up and down these areas that have been just ravaged economically because industries have left these areas, and nobody has discussed a plan of how we're going to bring them back. With all of these billions of dollars that are going to come to Illinois, that will come to Chicago, that if there is not a plan, the preferential few will get the largest, and the rest of the people who it was supposed to impact will be in the same condition, if not worse, and we'll be having the same conversation 4 years from now, 8 years from now. The plan, if they really want to get something, in 10 years, they can turn this around if they have the will to do so and the willingness to sit down and get away from their partisan, politics. I'm talking about Democrats now. I'm not talking about Republicans against Democrats or Democrats against. I'm talking about Democrats, because we have this problem in the Democratic makeup in Chicago where you got one Democrat that doesn't want to work with the other one because of some, ridiculous philosophical difference that they had. But the problem persists in the communities that they're supposed to be serving. That kind of nonsense where Lori Lightfoot and Tony Pretwinkle, because they were oppositions in an election one time and one lost that election, now they don't want to work together. It requires for the mayor, the governor, the Cook County Board, the city council, the General Assembly, we hire these people to address these concerns, and that is not happening. They have to get into the room, they have to work together and to put the resources together to address all of these problems that are producing the kinds of outcomes that we don't want.
Well, some of the outcomes we have control we have control over those outcomes. I mean, and I think that, you know, when you look back over my lifetime, I can remember a time when Black people did not do as well as we're doing now, economically speaking. Would you agree that Black people 1950 and 1960, thereabouts, are better off today than they were then, economically speaking?
Well, first of all, the dollar value back then
Well, no,
was
no, no,
was
no, no.
worth more than it
Economically,
is today.
we didn't have somebody who had a career such as I had.
Mhm.
Didn't happen in 1950. It didn't happen in 1960. I was able to go work for a major media corporation, stayed there 45 years, made good money, and not to say there wasn't racism, but it was there. Someone like
And it's,
just
it still is, but you're
let
talking
me
about
let
the
me let me
economic
let me
part of
finish.
it.
We're talking about the economic part of it. But at the same time, during those periods of time when Black people didn't have as much, our marriage rate was 80%. 80% of us were married, living in a father and a mother and the children in nuclear families. We don't have that today. We are leading the pack in terms of the breakdown of the American family. You look at the statistics as they affect Black people, and we are really leading the pack when it comes to the dysfunction of the American family. That is something that I believe we can control, but we have to bring it to the surface and begin to talk about it every day. We have to reestablish the North Star in our community as the nuclear family. If you father a child and if you give birth to a child, you should be involved in that child's life every day. Every day. There should be a mother, a father, a child. That's the nuclear family. Now, that's not a very popular assumption these days. We talk about all kinds of stuff about what a family is and what a family can be. Two guys can be a family, two women can be. You can have two mamas, you can have two daddies. But we have to hold in the Black community a North Star again. Our families are going to be different. How do we begin to teach that, reteach that? We can't have people going out and having 2 and 3 babies, different daddies, and then expect that those children are going to grow up to be good citizens, if you will. What is the expectation? How does that happen? When are we going to get back to basics? And hopefully somebody on this list can begin to talk about that and use the mayor's office as a bully pulpit to basically reform our families, because a lot of the poverty that we're talking about is self-imposed. If you're a woman
Not
and you
so.
have two, listen. If
Not
you're a
so.
woman and you have 2 children and no man in the house, you're going to be poor. You're going to have problems. You're not going to be able to go get the job that you want because you've got to take care of kids. A single parent family is not as effective as a 2 parent family. I believe that. No one will ever change that feeling on my part. But I don't hear us talking about that at all when we are the major offenders. Then on the abortion tip, do you realize that Black women are getting abortions at 3 to 4 times the rate the national average?
Uh,
3 to 4 times the national average. Black women are having abortions. That ain't right. What's going on?
well, you know, the you want to have these conversations, but if you want to look at historically the conversations about at the rate that they are incarcerating Black men doing the same thing that white men are doing at 7 and 8 times the rate that that white men are doing, disproportionately, you're incarcerating black men at 7 to 8 times the rates that are doing the same thing of white men that are doing at 7 to 8 times the rate.
And the point being?
The point being is that there is this phony, deliberate war that started back in the 1970s with Richard Nixon on this whole, fake war on, drugs at the time that he started, that has continued on black men. Then you manufacture these drugs that come from we don't know where and drop them in black communities that ravaged black communities in the late 1970s. And then here comes, Superman, Ronald Reagan, and the rest of anybody who wanted to go into public office. And all they talked about is their war on drug, which got them all elected in the 1980s. That's what everybody ran on. They didn't run on, let's have a war on poverty. That conversation stopped 50 years ago. And let's just have a war on drugs, that when a drug problem did not persist in the black communities. But then when they drop drugs into the black community, then let's have a war on drug and let's incarcerate them. In 1980, 180,000 black men were in the prison system in this country. By 1986, that number had gone from 180,000 to 660,000 based on this whole phony war on drugs, not war on poverty.
But a lot of the problem again comes from the single parent household.
Well, how could you not have a single parent household
saying that
when you're incarcerating black men at
you're
7 and 8
incarcerating
times
them,
the rate?
but a lot of black men got involved with drugs. A lot of black women got involved in drugs. I get that, but at the same time, we have to survive. It's on us to survive. We can't be passive victims.
Okay.
No, we have to begin to
say this. I agree with you. We got 8 people here. We got 8 people here. We're talking about Chicago now. We got 8 people here who are running for a public office, who are running for mayor, which is the second largest or third largest of municipality or something like that.
City in the country. Third largest city in the country.
So we got 8 of them running for mayor. We got a black woman right now is the mayor who has not a clue as what's going on the south and west side of Chicago. Not a clue.
No, she didn't live there.
All right. And it has not been
Neither
there.
do I.
And has not been there. You don't have to live there. She's the mayor. She has a responsibility to know what's going on in the city that she is responsible for, right? And she couldn't tell you any more about what's happening on the south or west side of Chicago, or even where certain neighborhoods is, that Herschel Walker knows about Georgia since he lives in Texas. Well, who is the mayor here? My point being is that you can talk about all of those other things. We all want for our families to be stronger. In the 1950s and 60s and 70s in Chicago, black families that were not at the upper echelon, 70% of employment in Chicago was in labor for black families. 70%. By 1986, that number had dwindled down to 28% because there was this exodus of the industries that black people were able to go and get career jobs, to buy a home, to buy a car, to send their children to school. And they were able to work 8 hours and go home and be with their families and provide for their families. When the socioeconomic problems of deprivation happen, you are going to have these symptoms that we have and that we see happening in our community. This is not deliberate on black people, because black people don't want to have families or don't want to have strong families. Most black families are pretty strong.
If we can get companies, manufacturers to come back to Chicago and recreate that 1960s kind of feel, 1970s even. Great, great. I'm just saying in the interim, we have some responsibilities of our own. If you know what's happening to you, if you know what's happening, then you have to take whatever action you can take to deal with it. I'm saying that the Black family has to reform. It has to reform the nuclear family, and we cannot have people having single parent households and actually planning this single parent household business where you father a child, you the baby daddy, and you don't have to do anything else. That's it. You the baby daddy. A lot of them don't even.
Where do you see that as a plan?
It's not a plan. That's what I'm saying.
Well, you
it's
said
not
planning.
a plan.
You said you see people planning.
I'm saying people do this, and there are no consequences that they understand.
There are
absolutely there are consequences, but they clearly do not
consequences.
understand the consequences.
But you
because
have to
nobody
talk about
wants
what is producing.
no woman wants to see her son end up in the penitentiary, or if worse, end up shot to death on the street in Chicago, probably by the son of another single parent.
Let me tell you about an experience
we have
that
to
I
begin
had.
to understand the dynamic that's happening to our people.
Well, I think in order to understand that dynamic, you have to talk to people who are struggling in these areas. And I talk to people all the time. One of the things that I absolutely pride myself on is making sure that I'm not just talking about people who are having these, but to talk to them to understand what these conditions are and who these.
I'm talking to statistics, to be honest with you.
Well, you're talking about statistics, but
yeah.
I talk to real people who they are writing these statistics about. And what I see is a big disconnection between the people who have the wherewithal to help to change these conditions, to help people to be able to be in this nuclear thing that you're, because there is a growing, unfortunately, a growing segment, but because you have people who are using our political systems, our governmental systems as a hustle for themselves and really not for the service of the broader community, so that we have a more thriving communities that we should be having in Chicago. Chicago is, has all kinds of monies coming through Chicago. The mayor went on television on this ridiculous commercial talking about we have the greatest economy in the country. We have the greatest economy in the country, but yet 1 in 4 of your children, Black children, are living in poverty. So who is she talking about when she talks about we have the greatest economy? She's talking about the people like her who are living in that fewer percentage. What about the other 90%? What about the other 80% that we should be making sure that we're creating an economy that these people can participate in and be a productive person in their own lives and in our economy? They're talking about, Willie Wilson talks about lowering taxes and all these taglines that you hear people talk about, right? Lowering taxes. How about the truth is that you're not necessarily going to lower taxes, but what you can do is stop raising taxes. And the way you can stop raising taxes is to expand the tax base. If you have more people in the tax base that are able to contribute, then you don't have to raise it on the same people that you're always raising it on. That's how you stop raising taxes and how you produce a real strong economy.
Probably we could move on to another topic, but you segued into one. Mm-hmm. You get that tax bill yet?
Yes, I did.
How's yours?
It's lower.
Yours is lower. Mine is up. Well, mine is higher, man. I don't know.
You probably should be higher.
Why?
Where you live downtown?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you probably.
Why should it be higher? I mean, it's gone up. I think it said it had gone up. I think since 2002 they give you a 20-year look. I think it went up like double.
Well, black communities are really starting to see their taxes become more in line, and getting lower rates of taxes because they have been hit the hardest.
I
Black
saw this woman
communities
on
have
Channel
been hit
9.
the hardest.
Yeah, I saw this
on
woman
the
on
south and
Channel
west sides
9,
of Chicago,
lived on the
and
west
certainly
side.
in the southern suburbs have been getting hit the hardest, right? Because building.
How did they do this time around? Have you heard? Because the bills actually haven't landed in mailboxes yet. A lot of them.
Yeah.
But I looked mine up online, and mine were significantly higher.
There are a number. Well, you live downtown, Charles.
Well, but why is that? I mean,
you probably live in a much more, I would say expensive.
No, I mean it's reasonable. It's reasonable.
Well,
I mean, I'm not
reasonable
living
is relative.
Huh?
Reasonable
no, I know
is
reasonable is relative, but I have seen a lot of the world, and I think that where I live is not considered a luxury place. I mean, it isn't. It might be compared to somebody who's living in a tent alongside the highway.
Oh, come on, Charles.
Well, I'm serious. I mean, but they might find it luxurious.
That's not.
But where I live is not luxury. It's a 1,500 square foot condominium.
A 1,500 square foot condominium.
Yeah.
A 1,500
square feet.
1,500 square feet condo.
Yeah.
A condo.
2 bedrooms.
That's 1,500. Two bedrooms and a 1,500 square foot.
Yeah.
Charles, the average house on the south side of Chicago.
I don't live there.
Oh, of course you don't.
Why should I live there?
I don't say that you
I
don't live there. I'm
live-
trying to help you understand it.
Live
I make my living on the south and west side of Chicago.
in
So
that
I'm
kind of
trying to
situation.
help you.
The taxes have gone up. I was living there 20 years ago,
Yeah.
and the taxes were a certain rate. They have said the taxes have gone up, and the price of the property.
20 years ago. Let me ask you a question.
Yeah, the price of the property hasn't gone up.
Oh, come
significantly. No, it has
Come
not.
on.
It
Come
has
on.
not. Not compared to what the taxes are.
Is your property worth what was 20 years ago?
My property is in real dollars, probably less in real dollars in terms of the value of the dollar.
No.
In terms of the actual on the face value, it's gone up.
Of course
Maybe.
It has. Of course it has.
Oh wait, I'm trying to give you a percentage. Probably.
I'm in the real estate. I'm in the real estate business 42 years.
I know, but it's gone up maybe 15% in the last 20 years. The value of what the assessor says the property is worth. Yeah, just 15%, and that goes back to 2002.
Well, maybe you should live on the south side because maybe you should move to the south side because guess what? Their values have increased. Pretty significantly.
Well, maybe but downtown
maybe you should consider moving to maybe the Gap or something. I just sold a building in the Gap for $850,000, a 3-flat.
How many square feet?
In Bronzeville. Well, there's like 1,200 square feet.
That's it.
1,200
That's
square
all?
feet for each unit.
Oh, for each.
Yeah,
but the building has 3 units.
It has 3 units.
Oh, so it's 3,600 square feet of living space in that whole building.
Right.
Yeah, that 850,000. That was a pretty good deal.
Well, look, but just a few years ago, a 3-flat, you couldn't buy a 3-flat 3 years ago was about $400,000 on the south side. But guess what?
It was how much?
Like $400,000.
That's what I'm saying. Your values have doubled. Mine have gone up 15%.
Well, maybe you should move to a
exactly.
better
maybe
area.
I should move to a better area, man.
I mean, well, not necessarily better, but you're getting a better value for your dollar.
I know a nice area.
But my point is that there are people who I sold a home in Hyde Park last year to a couple that moved from the north side because they wanted to buy a home, but the home that they wanted to buy on the north side, equivalent to the house that they bought from me, they would have had to pay $1.2 million for it.
I can see that.
The house that they bought from me, they paid $785,000.
I can believe that. Definitely.
Largest square footage, beautiful home. So there are people from the north side that are seeing great value on the south side of Chicago. So you might want to talk to your wife and and think about being my neighbor sometime.
Well, I can think about being your neighbor.
Yeah.
But
But
I know
I wanted to tell
I
you
thought
this
about
story.
moving. That's for sure.
I wanted to tell you this, that about, this whole family dynamic thing, because it's important, right? It's important, but it's not disconnected from some of these other issues that we have to hold whoever these people are that wants to become mayor. Because I am not interested in listening to a bunch of people sitting on a stage throwing rocks at each other. I'm not interested in that conversation. I'm interested in you saying to me and to our community, what is your plan? Don't tell me about what the other person is or is not doing. I want to know what your plan is. But if you don't have one, we've got one for you to understand and to find out if you have the willingness to do it. Because at this point, I don't have a dog in the hunt. Because what I'm interested in is our entire community being liberated and thriving. That's what I'm interested in, not the personality. I'm interested in the substance, the plan. That's what I'm interested in. I don't want to hear you give me, something. Well, we're just going to lower taxes. Okay, you're going to lower taxes. How is that going to change the conditions on the south side or the west sides of Chicago that you're going to lower taxes? How's that going to change a person who's got no job to pay any taxes?
Let me point out something else to you that maybe you have some reaction to it.
Mm-hmm.
What I have noticed, having covered mayoral elections since the 1980s, there is an absent party here in this election that I've noticed, and I don't know if you noticed it, but the business community. I haven't heard much, if anything, from the Chicago business community as it relates to this slate of candidates. Lori Lightfoot doesn't have their support, clearly, because I think if she did, you'd be hearing about it. I don't know which of these candidates can really claim support from the business community. They are conspicuously absent. When Rahm was running, you look at Rahm, he pretty much had it sewed up business wide. Daley pretty much had the business community sewed up. Lori Lightfoot, forget about it. She doesn't. Who does?
Well, I guess they're trying to see which one they're going to be able to buy. I think that's probably what they're doing, is seeing, well, who is it that we're going to have to buy? That's probably what the business community is looking at. But I think that more importantly, it's not so much as the business community that is avoided, but I think that your point is interesting. But I think that the business community is sitting on the sideline and they're talking, they're meeting the CEOs, they're meeting. Who is it that we're going to be able to buy, that we're going to be able to work with? But I think that we have to have someone who emerges that has the willingness to take on the business community in the sense that not as an opposition, but go to the business community and say, hey, we want you to do well. We want you to do well. But there has to be a real partnership of you doing well and the people who help you do well. The fact that we have CEOs that are earning 700 and 800 times the lowest or the average employee is just almost criminal when you see the cost that you and I are paying for goods. That means they're making record profits and they're still making 700 and 800 times that amount. But you don't see that type of growth on with the average employee.
Of course not.
Right?
No.
So there has to be that kind of conversation. And I believe that business people are not unreasonable people. They're not unreasonable to say, we still want to do business here. Right? This is a good place for us to do business. Let's negotiate. How do we expand the tax base? How do we create we have more people working, because the business people, if you got 30,000 people working and you can put another 30,000 people, that's 60,000 people working with jobs that can buy my stuff. I'd certainly like to expand my customer base by 30,000. And I'm just using that as a number, right? So the more people that we can get into the tax base, the more people that are earning can buy their goods, they can do well. I like the motto of the Ice Cream Brothers, Ben and Jerry's, how they operated their company. They operated their company to making sure that when they went up, everybody else in the company went up, right? That's the kind of effective leadership that I'd like to see. But these people,
that's not capitalism, though.
What?
That's not
capitalism.
capitalism.
They can call it whatever they want to call it.
I'm saying these guys, the business community, they basically are hardcore capitalists who are trying to maximize their profits for their shareholders.
Yeah, but they
don't really care about anybody else.
Yeah, well, that's true. But they need to be able to do business, and you have to have people in positions of government that use those positions to negotiate, because the tax or the business people certainly need the resources of our commons to be able to continue to do business. So they have to find an effective way to do that. I want to hear that from them. I want to hear what their plan is to do that, to improve these conditions, to change these conditions, because trust me, you are not going to change the outcomes of what we're seeing. More and more people in poverty, more and more crime happening, more and more people breaking into, your house, stealing your stuff so that they can go and hawk it so they can feed themselves. Because
no, these guys that are doing this stuff.
Hold on
in Chicago. They're not doing it because they're trying to eat.
No,
they're doing it because they're stealing.
No,
because they're thieves, man.
Charles,
they're thieves. They don't have any home training.
Charles, I know that.
Man,
that's
come
an easy.
on, man.
That's an easy.
Come on,
that's
man.
an easy thing
that's not easy
to say.
Thing. Nearly 40 people robbed during holdup sprees since Friday. I mean, I'm reading the headline. I mean, a lot of these guys see a mark and they mark it. They are criminals.
So how many
You've
times?
got
How many of these people?
Business.
How many of these people have you actually had a conversation with?
These people who are criminals?
Well,
lots of them.
Lots
of them in the time that I have.
When's the last time you've had a
it's
conversation?
been years. Obviously, I haven't been on the street working, but I mean, a criminal's a criminal. A lot of these guys do it because they can get away with it.
Let me tell you.
Or they feel they can get away with it.
Well,
until they get caught, they go to the penitentiary, then they come out and do it again.
A lot of people are doing it because they don't have access to anything else, because
Jean Valjean
excluding them, right, from having access. So they're saying that, you know what? They're not going to hire me over here. They're not going to give me an opportunity over here because of a pass that I have, or because in a lot of cases, these guys only have one infractions, and you still have people who want to exclude them and not get. So let me just say this. You can accept it or not. Any human being, and we've seen it happen, any human being is going to find a way to eat. They are going to find a way to eat.
I saw a 300-pound woman running down Oak Street, having done a smash and grab on Oak Street. She looked like she'd been eating, and she was on Oak Street getting purses out of a designer store. Yeah. I mean, she needs to go to jail.
Yeah, and that one person, that one person that you saw, I don't know, because
a lot of them do it.
But guess what?
Robbery on Oak Street.
A lot of them are doing it because they think that they risk getting caught. The risk of getting caught doing what they're doing is worth them taking that risk because they don't have another alternative. They don't have access to another.
They don't have another.
Many of them. Many of them.
Many of them.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't know, man.
Listen, I've had this is what I wanted to tell you.
That kind of activity has to stop.
Well, we don't. We're not condoning it,
No, I
Charles.
know that,
We're not
but it's
condoning
gotta
it.
stop,
But let
and
me just say
somebody's
that.
gotta stop
Well,
it.
we got to stop it, but you got to
gotta
have
stop
you
it.
have to have leadership that want to put things in place that to give people more access and opportunity to be able to function and to participate in the economic upward mobility. So that has to happen. When you continue to have these little cliques to where the largest are going to a few people, when you have a bunch of people in an area and there are a few resources, what do you think is going to happen? And you have a place like Chicago where you have the largest coming in and you got this preferential few black folks, I'm just talking about black folks now, who are in control of it, that are hoarding it for themselves and their few little friends and excluding everybody else in their neighborhoods and in their communities. What do you think is going to happen? And we have that happening in Chicago, that they are using the largest of our public commons as a hustle for themselves.
Largest of our public
commons.
commons.
Right? Resources.
Oh, resources.
All right. Resources that black folks are in charge of. We have more black folks elected from 1983 till now. And the conditions of the black community is in shambles, because there has not been effective leadership. Period. It's just become a hustle for those that are there. That's what a big part of the problem is.
Yep. Well, I think definitely that we have some organizing to do, not just politically citywide, but I'll go back to my original point. We've got some reorganizing to do in our homes, and then in our neighborhoods, before we start dealing with the city. I mean, we have to deal with the city at the same time. I get that. But we've got some immediate situations that we can deal with on our own. And we've dealt with them in the past. And we were better off, quite frankly, family-wise, certainly. I mean, in fact, we married at a higher rate than white people. Our families were intact, and we used those families as a base to get involved economically and politically. They were our base, but now we have no base whatsoever. We have no base. I mean, kids don't even know who their father is. They don't, again, God forbid, their grandfather, they would have no idea, or their great-grandfather or grandmother and such. They're just out there. They have no frame of reference for themselves. They don't know who they are. And I think that's a problem we can solve on our own by simply talking about it and talking it through. I think we can do that. It tells our young people, restore some responsibility to them, because what's happening right now is we're not going to survive as a people, not only in the city, but in the country, unless we get that part of it together, because we are leading the way in the dissolution of the family.
If you don't change the exclusionary practices that are happening locally as well as nationally, you're not going to change it.
When I think about what my father endured, what I endured, I'm going to mention my grandfather, but who I knew very well, what they endured, exclusionary practices. I mean, I would be ashamed to compare what's going on now to what happened to my father and my grandfather. I knew those men. They were good men, strong men, and they survived. And those were exclusionary. That was exclusionary, statutory racism. They survived it and they prospered. They sent me to college. My father owned a grocery store. My grandfather owned a grocery store. And he supported 9 children with it in a black community. Then my father he worked at the post office, was married to my mother every day of my life, of his life.
Well,
I
the
knew him.
post office is still, I believe, the largest employer of black folks in
But I
in
mean,
this
he wasn't
country.
rich, but he was there. He was at my home, and every day I came home, my dad was there, and there were things I was not going to do because he was there, and he was the big guy.
He was able to provide for the family.
Absolutely,
Okay,
provided for the
so-
family, but he also disciplined me and
But
my
he was
brother
able.
and
He
my
was available
sisters.
to do that. He was
Absolutely.
available to do that, and he
But
was able to
we have
do
to
that.
get back to that. We have to go. Why are we leading the league in single parent families? Why us?
well-
Why when we used to lead the league in marriages?
The economic difference in terms of wealth between the average white person and the average black person. The average white person has 17 cents to every penny in Chicago. That the black people have. Do you know that on the north side of Chicago, just sort of put this in context so that you, from real estate, on the north side of Chicago, 90% of all buildings that were dilapidated and destroyed on the or demolished on the north side of Chicago from 2010 to now, 90% of them have been rebuilt. 90% of the buildings on the south and west side of Chicago that have been demolished are still vacant parcels of land.
Who's supposed to rebuild them?
Vacant parcels. There has to be. That's why it is important for
But
the economic.
is the city supposed to rebuild them? I'm just asking.
Oh,
I'm not.
It's not it's not the city that it's a building, but they're certainly supposed to be in partnership, providing resources to help people in the communities.
But
to be able
resources,
to
you mean
rebuild
like
them.
money and or did
Yeah,
they
resources
ease the
and
zoning
access.
or what?
Well, it's not so much as easing the zones, but certainly having equal access. Because if you can rebuild 90% of the ones that are demolished on the north side, why is it that 90% of the ones on the south side?
Is the city
not
rebuilding
being
those
doing-
on the north side? Or
There's certain-
is the city rebuilding them?
Well,
Or those
the
private
city,
developers?
No, the city is helping private developers. When you can give private developers on the north side $1 billion TIF subsidies and tax incentives to be able to do that, you should be doing the same thing.
So why
on
aren't
the
they
south
doing
side?
it? I mean, there are plenty of black aldermen. There's 20 black aldermen.
Yeah, well,
and a black mayor and black treasurer and what's up?
That's a good question, because it's a hustle for the people that are inside. That's when you talk about organizing. That's what we have to organize, is to make sure that the distribution of our resources are equitable. Because you can't tell me, because when I came to Chicago, Lawrence Avenue looked almost close to Little Cambodia in 1985.
I remember that.
Go up and down Lawrence Avenue now. It almost looks like Rush Street. And I am not begrudging that.
Who are the owners?
Well, certainly not us.
It's a lot of Cambodians and Vietnamese and Southeast Asians who still own those buildings, who developed those buildings. And I'm sorry, as a black man, I wouldn't trade who I am to be a Vietnamese. I mean, I think they just worked at it and they built their own community.
Oh, no. They listen, they didn't just work at it. They had access to resources to be able to build them.
Okay. Where'd they get the resources?
That's a difference. Well, there are lending institutions that provide them with resources, as well as there are city subsidies, city block grants that they provide to these people to be able to rebuild these communities that are not provided on the south side. TIF dollars that are supposed to be used on the south side are taken to build a $26 million Ferris wheel at Navy Pier that was supposed to be used to redevelop blighted areas. That was actually started under the Harold Washington administration for that purpose, but they're not being used for those purposes. So we do have dollars that are being redirected to other communities that are not being directed at an equitable rate in Black communities. So a lot of that nonsense has to stop. And we have all these Black folks in positions, more than 150 or so, largely from Chicago, that are in these positions.
Okay.
We're not having.
Before we wrap up here, because I think we're getting down to cases here. 2 minutes. You don't have any idea yet who you like, who you think is the favorite among these 10 candidates.
Who I think is the favorite?
Yeah.
I don't.
I do.
I don't.
I think Chuy Garcia is the favorite, and I wish Willie Wilson could win. I mean, Willie's got my vote because I think Willie's the one guy that can deal with the crime situation. Huh?
I like Willie, but he doesn't have my vote.
Okay. Well, I like Willie. He's got my vote. However, I don't know that he can win citywide. I don't think that he translates to the North Side, for one, or to the Latino community, which really isn't that formidable in terms of its vote power. But I don't think Willie translates enough to the North Side. Now, if he sold properly as the most conservative candidate, he might play well in the 19th Ward and up in the Northwest Side. If he can get enough Black votes, then maybe he could. But I don't see him translating at this point.
If he's got a plan,
I think he's
an
got
effective plan.
I think he's got a plan.
He could have a chance, but I just don't see him as having an effective plan. And at this point, I don't see any of them that has an effective plan.
Chewy's going to get that downtown business vote.
All right.
Because I think people realize that the city's demographic is changing. And one thing that will happen during his term is that undocumented people will get the right to vote during his term.
Yeah, I don't
as
know.
they're doing in other big cities around the country.
All right, you and I are going to be talking about this at length in the weeks to come. The election is February the 28th. We're going to be talking about it, and we'll be.
Can you believe that?
Seeing February the 20th. It's right around the corner. I know. It's right around the corner, so they don't have a whole lot of time.
2.5 months
to get it together. But we're going to be talking about this at length. You all continue to tune in to Mark Wallace and Charles Thomas right here every Monday night on The People Show on IntellectualRadio.com. And we will be back with you next week at the same time, same place.